Welcome to the VBAC Home Birth Stories podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Winning, founder of the Motherhood Circle and creator of the Journey into Motherhood program. I'm a mother of two and have had two unplanned and unneeded C-sections and am planning my first home and vaginal birth. My own journey has sparked a deep passion to support women to find their own voice and strength to create the pregnancy, birth and motherhood experience you desire. This podcast is for women wanting to learn more about VBACs, especially home births, and for professionals who want to learn more about how to support VBAC home birthing women. Inside, we're going to share women's stories from surgical birth to achieving their vaginal home birth after cesarean. Now let's get started. Hey, me again. I just wanted to let you know that I've just created a brand new Facebook group called VBAC Home Birth Support Group, where you can connect with other like-minded mothers who are looking to have a VBAC home birth as well. You can find the link in the show notes, and I look forward to seeing you there. Hi, Emerald. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm really excited to talk to you and to hear your birth stories. Please introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Emerald. I am originally from the United States, and I've been living here in Australia, particularly in Victoria, for a little over 3 years, 3.5 years now. And I love it here. I love it being an Aussie. It's a great country. It's a great place to be. I've got two little ones, Indy, who's 3.5 years old, and little Zuzu, who's just about 16 months old. And yeah, it's just a little snippet about me.
Awesome. Well, I was just talking to you on video, so I could see that you were in the beautiful sun. So I'm sure you're enjoying the weather, even though it's a little bit cool. It's still such a beautiful kind of warm day in the sun, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, definitely. It's
a windy day today.
Yes, it is. It happens to be so, yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks for introducing yourself. Let's hear about your first pregnancy, which was in America, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. So with my first pregnancy, Indy, I guess I'll start with the fact that I was very uncertain how much to have my pregnancy and birth in the system and how much not to. And I had a lot of fear around pregnancy and birth because I had experienced 2 miscarriages before this pregnancy. And with the latest miscarriage, I personally believe that it was related to too much exposure to ultrasound. And so I was a little nervous about everything. I was actually just terrified when I found out I was pregnant with Indy. And to give a little just perspective on what I mean with the ultrasound with the miscarriage was that I had volunteered to let some nurses practice ultrasound on me. So uterine ultrasound. And so I had one of those lovely wands up my vagina for about an hour, which is a lot longer, a lot longer than normal. And I miscarried 2 days later, and in that hour-long ultrasound, there was a heartbeat, and everything was textbook perfect. So to me, I just really felt like it was connected. So anyway, going into Indy's pregnancy, I was just full of fear, and I did just decide to go with the normal OB route to start, and then I figured I could switch maybe to a midwife, a home birth midwife or something longer down the track. So I started by having the regular prenatal appointments, and I had bleeding early in the first trimester, and just so much stress and so much fear of losing this pregnancy. And I did get a few ultrasounds, only 2, but they were short. I felt like I needed the validation and the proof that there was a little being in there, because, in the first trimester, it's just so uncertain, because you kind of, you feel icky, you feel off, something's happening in your body, but you can't feel a baby. You can't feel the presence of the baby quite yet. And so I did have the routine appointments in the beginning, and my husband and I decided to move to a different state when I was out of my first trimester. And I didn't establish right away any care with another OB. I decided I'd like to try to find a home birth midwife or a midwife-run birthing center. And in America, it's incredibly expensive to have a baby. If you don't have insurance from your employer or Obamacare there, which is insurance that you can pay for independently, but it's very expensive. So anyway, I was interviewing some different midwives, and it was going to cost, roughly like $7,000 to $8,000 to have a home birth with a private midwife. And, we weren't just quite financially in that position to be able to pay that out of pocket, but also giving birth at a hospital without insurance. If you were to have a totally uncomplicated vaginal birth, it costs you about $26,000.
Wow,
and that's
so expensive.
Yes. So there's a lot of stress financially around having babies in America. And so I kind of just decided to, not see anybody until I felt like it was right, or I found the right person, or we were financially able to find the right midwife or OB, so on and so forth. And I had decided to skip the 20-week morphology scan. I, at that point in my pregnancy, was feeling really good and felt confident in everything, and that the pregnancy was going to stick. And I just decided, you know what, I don't want to have any more ultrasounds. I just kind of want to let the rest of the pregnancy unfold as naturally as possible. And ultimately hoping for a drug-free vaginal birth. And then, let's see, so pregnancy is going great. Around 35 weeks of pregnancy, because of just life circumstances, my husband and I had to move back to my home state. So we've uprooted everything twice in this pregnancy, and which I hear is just in so many different women's pregnancy stories. I hear this all the time. So many couples are moving during pregnancy. And,
yeah, it's a fresh start, maybe. Fresh
yeah,
start with this new baby.
Yeah, exactly. So we moved back to my home state, and we're living with my parents temporarily. And there's actually a birth center that I've always had my eye on that was in my hometown of Boulder, Colorado. And I had gone there to interview some midwives, and I just absolutely got the best vibe from them. And I was like, the birthing suites, the birthing rooms were just beautiful. It was just like nothing medical or industrial about it. It was just very warm and lovely. And we were able to work out a great payment plan with them to be able to birth there. And one of the requirements from the midwives was that they needed to know the location of my placenta. So they recommended I go to the hospital to have a quick scan, the placement of where my placenta was. And so I agreed. I said, that's fine. And so at this point, I'm 37 weeks pregnant. And I actually didn't really know that when I booked in with the hospital for the scan, they were planning on doing the whole morphology scan. So it wasn't just going to be a quick, 2-minute thing where they're like, okay, your placenta is anterior or posterior or what have you. It was going to be the full scan. And basically at 37 weeks, you don't have very much amniotic fluid left. The baby's so big and so well developed. It's just really hard to see everything clearly on the ultrasound. So we go through the whole ultrasound, what lasts like 30 minutes, half an hour. And I thought everything was great. We were feeling really good. And they sent in this supposedly expert. She said, so there's something really serious we need to talk about. And we were unable to see your baby's cerebellum, which is a very big part of the brain. And she said, that the ultrasound could be not clear, it could be there and we just can't see it. But basically, since they can't tick off that box of requirements for the midwives, I was disqualified completely from giving birth at the birth center. Which was completely
Yeah, definitely. Especially since you were going to this ultrasound thinking it was just for placenta placement as well.
Exactly. It was absolutely devastating. I was heartbroken, and for so many reasons. I'd been dreaming of my natural birth practically my whole life, and my mother, my sister and I were both birthed via C-sections, and the doctors told my mother, she just didn't have a good cervix. That's why she couldn't give birth vaginally. And I just did not believe that. I truly believe that was just a lie. Our bodies are not just broken, and so I felt like I had this point to prove that I could do it. I could birth a baby the way that I want. And so I was kind of mourning that, and also hugely, is there something wrong with my baby? Very, very wrong. And, the prospect of possibly losing our baby at birth or having lifelong disabilities. It's absolutely terrifying, and I don't wish it on anyone in the world that late in pregnancy to be just filled with that fear. Very intense.
Yeah, I can imagine. It would just be terrible. 37 weeks and getting that information and then losing your safe space to birth in and not knowing how your baby is and the uncertainty of it all. So you're no longer able to birth in your safe space. So now your choice is, if you call it a choice, at the hospital.
Correct. Yeah. So they just booked me in with the OBs at the local hospital there. So I never met the OB that was going to be attending the birth. So she was a stranger, which, is nothing, is just not that great.
No.
If someone you're supposed to be trusting in and you should have been developing a relationship with for at least a while is now like a stranger.
Mm-hmm.
So I was very, my husband and I were very sure that everything was okay with our baby. We, despite what the doctor said, I've actually have had several bad experiences within the hospital and with doctors. And so I just felt like we could trust our intuition, and felt like, the baby's okay. We're still going to try to have the best birth that we can at the hospital. Let's just make the best of it that we can. And I was really, really not wanting to be induced. And the OBs at the hospital were, every visit we were there, they were pushing to induce me. And so I carried to 41 weeks, and I went in for an NST scan. I'm not sure if it's called the same thing here. It's it's where they put the monitor on your belly and listen to the heart rate, and they want to hear a certain, ebb and flow of the heart rate.
I think we just call that continuous monitoring here with the continuous monitors.
Yeah.
And it's pretty common.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after that, everything was in the range of normal. And the OB's just like, she was just very much trying to instill fear into me, and it worked. She's like, it doesn't sound good, and we don't know the status and the condition that your baby's going to be in when it's born. We really need you. Not that we need you, we really want you to be induced. And I had at that point just kind of had it. I was emotionally exhausted and had kind of just had enough. And so I agreed to be induced. And the induction that we did was with a balloon placed in my cervix. And kind of the protocol with it is that they insert the balloon, and then 12 hours later, they start you on a Syntocin drip to get the contractions going. Mm-hmm. So that's what we had agreed to. So they placed the balloon inside, and my husband and I were able to go home, get a bag, and we checked into the hospital and into our room. And about 4 hours after the balloon was inserted, I started having regular contractions, which was great, because I'm like, this is great because so far no drugs have been introduced. Like, maybe this will just kickstart the labor and I won't have to go down any kind of rabbit hole of drugs. And so all night we checked in, around 8 p.m. My contraction started around 8 p.m. And all night they were going fairly regularly. I was having them about every 5 minutes, lasting a minute. I was able to really get into it. I was just walking around the hospital floor. I was experiment, like what felt good. There was a tub and a shower, so I tried that. I, at this point, didn't need to be hooked up to anything, which was great. And my husband just slept all night, and I was just like really feeling the contractions and going with it. And in the morning, I hadn't been able to sleep because that's how continuous and strong the contractions were. And the first nurse that came in, who I had not met yet, she just kind of laughed at me and was like, "Why didn't you sleep?" And I was like, "Well, I couldn't because of the contractions." And she just didn't believe me. She didn't believe that I had contractions. She's trying to convince me that I made the worst decision in the night and I should have forced myself to sleep. And she's like, "It's going to be a really long haul if you don't get some rest." And I'm like, okay. And so she gave me a sleeping pill, which I do not know why I took it. This is 6 a.m. and I took a sleeping pill. because she's trying to get me to rest. Well, it had also been 12 hours since the balloon had been inserted, so they were going to start the Pitocin drip, or excuse me, Syntocin. It's called Pitocin in the US. And I don't know, you know, people who have experienced Syntocin, yeah, you can't sleep through that. You can't sleep through those contractions. It was so intense. I wasn't thinking clearly. I think the sleeping pill made me super foggy brained, and I could not find any strength within me to really know what I wanted and like knew where I stood in all of it. It was just like so much fear being shoved onto me and for everyone around me. And so I was on the Syntocin. I went 6 hours with the Syntocin drip, and finally around noon gave in to have an epidural. The Syntocin was giving me minute-long contractions and only a minute break. So I was having contractions every other minute, and they were so intense, like out of this world. Nothing I did could help alleviate any of the sensations. And so around noon, I gave into the epidural. I had a nap, started to feel really good, obviously, because now I wasn't feeling any pain. And, you know, I had been periodically checked. I was really progressing slow, which makes sense, because first baby, and also the drugs in my system. And that afternoon, see, they broke my waters. That didn't progress anything. Anyway, we get to around 6:30 that night, and everyone's talking, you know, the C word, like, we just need to get you in for a C-section. We just need to get you in for a C-section. And at that point, I felt like everything had already been kind of robbed from me. Like, I'm just going to do it. So they, you know, they categorized my C-section as a failure to progress, which is not true. Like, I was progressing. It just wasn't at the speed that they were wanting.
Yeah.
And
we like to call it a failure to wait. That's what I like to
failure to wait.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's just a failure to wait, because it's normal for mums, first time mums especially, to be in labor from 24 to 3 days, you know.
Exactly. And especially if my body wasn't ready yet. I was induced, so my body's like all of a sudden like, oh wait, now we're doing this. Okay, well, you know, it wasn't like baby wasn't ready. My body wasn't ready to give birth. So it just, it was really forced. And so we go in for the C-section, and my body's pretty much in shock at this point from the amount of Syntocin in my body and the epidural. I just start shaking. I'm like shaking violently, and I can't stop shaking and have the chills. I'm just freezing, and they're trying to do everything they can. You know, they were, you know, and the greater aspect of everything, you know, they were quite friendly nurses and doctors and stuff, but, you know, it just was another and my arm, you know, to the side of me, like I can't put my arms up, shaking. They do a test, like sensation feel, to make sure I was fully numb, and I could feel what they poked me with. I'm like, no, I can feel that. And they're like, okay, well, we'll wait just another few minutes, and they're gonna pump me with more drugs. And they just decided to go ahead, and it's like I could feel it, but I couldn't feel it, and it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. I could feel their hands inside me. I could feel that I could feel them tugging my baby out, and they pull Lindy out, and we didn't know the sex. So my husband's like, oh, it's a boy. And I just they showed him to me, and just didn't, it sounds horrible, but I just didn't feel anything. I felt I was so pumped up with drugs, and my body was just overstimulated, and I was trying not to faint. I was almost fainting, and it's one of the saddest moments of all of it, because it should be the best moment in your life, looking at your baby, your first baby, and it was, but it also wasn't. It was, something was stolen, I feel like something was stolen from me. And of course, after he was born, guess what? Perfectly healthy. He had his entire brain. He was, a very healthy little boy. And we struggled to breastfeed. And I really think that was because, we made it. It was very hard, though. I think that was because of the drugs and the C-section that made the breastfeeding so hard. I was almost screaming in pain and tears for 6 weeks, and I was up at all hours trying to pump and supplement as much of my own milk. I was refusing to give him formula. I had to breastfeed him. And so I was pumping every other hour to make sure he was getting enough milk, and bottle feeding him, and then going back to trying to breastfeed. And we eventually got there, and thank goodness we got a long 2-year breastfeeding journey with each other. So that's kind of that pregnancy and birth summed up. A bit traumatizing. Needless to say. Go ahead.
How did you feel in your postpartum afterwards? Did you have stories that you were dealing with? How was your mindset and your mental health through that period? Because obviously you got this brand new baby, which is exciting and happy, but did you have any stories that you were telling yourself or that kept popping in your mind about what had happened?
Really, so my postpartum period was very hard. So we were still with my parents when we came home with him, which there's the good and the bad with that, any family dynamic. And my husband and I decided about, 6 to 7 weeks postpartum that we were going to move to Australia. And I pushed the birth and the pregnancy trauma in the back of my mind, and I'm like, I'll deal with it later. We're going to focus on something exciting. We're moving to a new country, and my husband's Australian, so he's moving home. I'm moving to a new country. I'm getting prepared for that. And so we moved to Australia when my son was 3 months old. And once we got here, I just got enveloped in depression and postpartum depression. And it was a lot of things that I just didn't deal with after the birth. And it kind of all added up, and it built up and it built up. And I just kind of crashed physically and emotionally and spiritually. And I struggled with postpartum depression for probably 18 months, but the stories, it was really easy for me to just point my finger and blame everyone else around me for what happened. But I know that's not true. I could have been so much more prepared. I could have been so much more educated. I thought that I had mentally and physically prepared myself, but I was definitely nowhere near where I should have been. And I think that, you know, I don't blame myself. I have forgiven myself. You know, I don't feel any trauma anymore linked to it. It was incredibly hard lesson for me. And I realized that I had to put in, for our next child, I needed to put in like 110% into creating what I really wanted for the birth, and that it wasn't just going to happen. I had to really work on myself and work with relationships around me and dedicate, like, this is what I'm going to do. And yeah, so yeah, I guess then I could go into my second child, or is there anything
sure.
else?
No, that's good. That's good to hear, you know, the full postpartum.
Yeah, so so we're here in Australia, and we've been living in this rental in Victoria, and, you know, I'm working through postpartum depression stuff, and my husband's also working through some of his trauma with it. Decided to kind of sell everything that we had accumulated over that year or so, and we got a little camper van, or no, like a camper trailer, I guess. And we just decided to go on the road and travel and just like get out into nature. And I just feel like nature for both him and I is very healing. And we just wanted some self-reflection and just get out of kind of society a little bit. So we go down to Tasmania for 3 months, and we're just camping for 3 months. And it was great. It was hard, but it was really great. And I became pregnant with our second when we were down in Tasmania. And so we came back to Victoria. Oh, and so I guess, so when I found out I was pregnant, I knew I was pregnant before I got a positive pregnancy test. And I had decided, you know, I'm going to do everything different this time around. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to allow myself to be crippled by fear, and really, really figure out like what is going to be best for me and what is going to be best for this new baby. So like with Indy, I am not joking, I probably took 100 pregnancy tests. I got like a bulk pregnancy test thing off Amazon, and I was taking a pregnancy every test, but every day. That's just how obsessive and how much fear I had with his pregnancy. And with Zuzi's pregnancy, I took one test when we were out in the middle of nowhere in this forest. We had stopped at an IGA and I got a pregnancy test. It came back positive, and that was the only pregnancy test I took for the whole time. And I just let everything go. And I'm like, you know, I'm not going to have any fear of miscarrying. I'm not going to have any fear of just unnecessary fears that I think that like society really puts on pregnant women. And I'm just going to figure out what's right for me. And so we go back to Victoria, and I spend the rest of my first trimester. We stay with my husband's family. And so that was great because, you know, the first trimester is just so icky. It's nice to have help with your other child, and just to have a little extra support during that time is really nice. And so we were tired of being cold from being in Tasmania for 3 months, and we decided to go up. Let's drive up to Queensland and let's just spend a few months up in warmer weather and we had it in mind that we were going to maybe find a little town we really connected with, or just something like that along the way. But if not, that's okay. We can come back to Victoria to, have the baby surrounded by family and stuff, or whatever. We'll just see how it unfolds. I wasn't going to worry about it. And I had not decided at this point to free birth. I was really planning on having a home birth with a midwife. And we were staying up outside of Noosa, up there on the Sunshine Coast. And oh, sorry, actually no, we were down in New South Wales. So we've been traveling for a few months, and we were creeping up to that 20-week mark. And I hadn't seen anybody for the pregnancy yet, a midwife or a doctor or anything. And I was thinking, maybe I'll get in touch with a midwife locally and I'll go get the morphology scan, because I don't want to make the same mistake that I did last time and not get it, and then for it to, kind of bite me in the bum later on. So I meet this really nice local midwife, and I go in to have the morphology scan, and it's the first time we see the baby, and I knew she was healthy. I could feel her moving in me. I really had done so much work to just trust the process, and I was feeling so good, feeling so great, and so got that done. It was great to see her, but I wasn't planning on having any more. And we weren't going to stay in that area. And we just kept, it sounds so strange, but we just kind of kept going from town to town, like short little bursts, and staying there for a while and seeing if we felt, a connection to the area and the people, and if were there any midwives there. And we kind of just trotted around like southern Queensland and that north coast of New South Wales, and the pregnancy was starting to draw closer and closer to the third trimester, and I was really starting to want to nest, and I was starting to have a really hard time being in a camper and just getting that far along in pregnancy, and I was just getting uncomfortable, and we had to kind of hop up on our bed, and that was starting to get hard. So I'm like, okay, I think it's time for us to just probably go back to Victoria, and we'll just settle down there for the last trimester, and I can nest, and we can just start grounding and get ready for this next birth. And I had started reading a bunch of books. I was reading books throughout my whole pregnancy on home births, and a lot of Ina May Gaskin and other ones and stuff. And I started coming across these free birthing books, and I just thought, people do that? Like, women give birth with nobody there? That seems crazy. I don't know. And but I was really inspired by the stories I was reading, and then I stumbled across the Freebirth Society and their podcast, and I started listening more and more to these women's stories, and I just started becoming so inspired. And I'm like, oh my gosh, these women are awesome. They're just taking complete control and radical responsibility for their choices in their birth, and they birth their babies their way and on their terms. And I'm like, okay, I'm starting to lean towards this is what I want to do, and I believe I can do it. And it's great because the Freebirth Society has a whole free birthing course, and so I did that once we got back to Victoria. And I never thought that I'd get to the point where I'd feel confident enough to do it on my own. But after I did the course and reading stories, listening to podcasts, I felt like, okay, I can definitely do this by myself. I actually don't even need my husband here. Like, I feel I can do this. And so around we got a birthing pool, and we got this one that had like a heater with it, which I just liked the idea of. I knew that I was going to want to be in water, and so we got this one with like a heat pump, so you could really regulate the temperature. And I got, I put up all these affirmations. I made sure the lighting's right. I just feel like your environment and everything around you is crucial for having birth. And like, because little things can really throw you off, I feel like, in a home birth. And like, I just wanted quiet, dark space. I got a lot of things that I wasn't sure if I was going to use or not, but just in case, like an eye mask. I didn't know if like I'd really want to go inward and not have any light coming through, or so on and so forth. So I was nearing 40 weeks and feeling really good the whole pregnancy. Like, yeah, I don't know. It was just such a drastic change, such a drastic difference from my first pregnancy. And I wasn't worrying about when labor was going to happen or when the birth was going to happen. I just felt really calm and like, I'm just going to let this unfold how it unfolds. And I think like with birth, like surrendering to the process, trusting the process is like all you have to do. Like getting your mind out of it is like the best thing, because our mind is what limits us when it comes to anything that we want to achieve or anything that we want to do in life. So 40 weeks comes and goes, and then on, I think it was like 40 weeks and 3 days, we decide to set up the birthing pool, kind of do a trial run through of like, okay, my husband, go get this, and like we'll set up this, we'll put up our affirmations, we'll get everything set up, let's see how long it takes us to get everything done. I was fully expecting like I could be in labor for 3 days. I don't know, I haven't gone through a natural labor process, so I don't know what to expect. Let's just prepare for it to be that long, or so
better
we set
plan
everything
for the
up.
worst. Plan for the worst.
Yes.
It's going to be a week labor, and then be surprised.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it was just such a wonderful day. Actually, we had music playing, and my son and I, he was like 2.5 at this point, and we're just cleaning. I was like crazy cleaning mode with my nesting. I was probably vacuuming every single day, and I was thinking, if I'm in labor, I'm not going to want to see dirt on the floor. Like, I just know that. So we're dancing around, cleaning, we're setting everything up, and then it's coming around dinner time and getting ready for dinner. So we put everything down and put it away, and I hop into bed with my son, Indy, and there's just this gush, and I'm like, oh my God. Like, I've been on my feet all day. I was really tired. I was ready just to relax, and then bam. Okay, what's happening? Something's happening. So I run to the toilet and I wipe, and it's just a bloody show. And I'm just like, giddy, just so excited. And I'm like to my husband, like, Helen, oh my gosh, like, I think it's my mucus plug, my bloody show. That means like labor could start now, or it could start in a few days, but it's soon. Like, we're coming to the precipice.
Yeah.
Yes, so exciting. So contractions start immediately. And I'm like, all right, this is it. Go get that pool set up again, even though he just broke it down, and get it filled up. Like, let's get going. So it takes him about an hour and a half to get the pool set up and filled. And I hopped in the shower and I'm like giggling and laughing because I felt like I've already kind of like won. Like my body just is going into labor on its own. I'm not broken. Like I can do this. It's so exciting. So, and I'm just rocking and kind of dancing and moaning with the contractions, and my son's just happy laying on the bed, and we put on a movie for him, and we set up the birthing pool in the bedroom because that's just where I felt safest. And I wasn't worried really about what my son was going to be doing. I just kind of figured it'd work out. Whatever happened, wherever he was going to be, it was just going to work out how it worked out. And it did. It was great. The pool was set up and it was heated, and so I jumped in the pool, and Indy jumped in with me, and he was having fun splashing around. And then the contractions started getting a little more intense, and probably around like 7:30, 8 o'clock, I was like, couldn't handle having like any other external stimulation. So like Indy got into bed and he ended up just falling asleep on his own, and I just put on some headphones and just went inward and just kind of sang over and over again some mantras of just like releasing and surrendering and just flowing with the waves. It's such a wave and it's such a dance with labor. And my goal between each contraction was to just completely relax and just let go and let my body rest. And so I did this. There was no timing contractions. I didn't care. They were happening. So it was like, I don't need to control this in any way with my mind. Like my mind just needs to be out of it. So around midnight, my water breaks in the pool. And there was no, I looked for some meconium or anything like that, and it was just all clear from what I could tell in the water.
Oh, so your waters, what happened earlier? Was it a little bit of a hind leak or something earlier?
It was my mucus plug and bloody show that came out.
So it wasn't your waters that was coming out, it was your mucus. Okay.
Though I think that my waters were a bit leaky for a while because I had some like weird tiny gushes like the weeks leading up to labor. And I couldn't tell if I was peeing myself or what. But it didn't smell of urine. So like I was looking it up and I'm like, I don't think that I'm having bladder control issues. So I think there was just it was kind of gushing a little bit leading up to labor. And when the mucus plug released, there's a little gush of liquid, but I felt a balloon pop inside me around midnight. So I knew that's the only way I knew that my waters broke, because it just felt like a little pop, like in a release. Okay, so I think that was my waters. Okay. And my husband's just sitting there. I really felt great on my own. He kept trying to massage me, and I was like, nah, don't touch me. I don't want to be touched. Though the gesture's nice, I just, I just need to be on my own. And the only time I really needed him was during a contraction. I felt like having a counter pressure weight for me to pull on was so helpful. So I would pull on his arms during a contraction, and I could lean back and just like be totally taken by the contraction, but like held and like It was great. It was just this beautiful kind of dance through it. And, I listened to some music, but I found it distracting. I used my eye mask, but, I didn't need it. The room was quite dark already, and we just had some candles lit. And so after my waters break around midnight, I decide I think I'm going to try to check myself and see if I can feel something. So I stick my fingers up, and I felt nothing. It was just like a void. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, it was the first time I had the hint of fear come in. And I'm like, okay, let it go. Just because you don't feel anything doesn't mean something's not happening. I just had to release the fear. So I worked through the fear, I released it, and I just went back to the dance of the contractions, and I was falling asleep in between the contractions. I feel like I was in active labor for probably 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours of a contraction every 2 to 3 minutes, lasting a minute. And around 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, my body, and I could not push. I'm like, okay, so this is it. I guess I'm starting to push now. Like, I'm just letting my body take over. My body knows what to do. And so I start pushing with every contraction, and it started to feel good. Like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, the contractions were super intense, but it's nothing you can't handle. And the pushing felt like satisfying, almost like felt really productive. And so I started pushing, and maybe around like 3 in the morning, I decided, okay, you know what? I'm just going to check again. Let's just see what's going on. So I stick my fingers inside, and there's a head, a very hairy head. Yay. Right there. And I was just laughing and just like ecstatic. And I'm like, Callum, to my husband, like, you got to feel. So he got to feel the head right there. And I was like, oh my gosh, we didn't know what it was yet, but she was so close. And so her head, when she started to crown, it was just this, I wasn't going to force anything. I was a little worried about tearing, but I thought, like, if I could just breathe and let my body do the pushing, I'm not going to worry about tearing or anything. And so she's crowning, and she's kind of, her head's coming out a little bit, then going back in, coming out a little bit, going back in. And we kind of did that back and forth for a while, at least half an hour, which, is quite intense. You've got the ring of fire type burning sensation of that stretching, but she's stretching me slowly, and her head comes through, and I stick my hand down to feel what position she was in, and she was she was in an anterior position, and so I was like, oh God, baby, being in the perfect birthing position. And because Indy was posterior when I was in labor with him, so that was always in the back of my mind for this labor and delivery. But then so one more push, and her shoulders just popped out, and then I pulled her up, and I was done. I did it. I'm holding this baby in the water. I did it by myself. Oh my God. And Callum, my husband, comes over, and we're just staring at her, and I just did not recognize her. She looked so foreign to me. I'm like, who are you? Who is this little baby? And I got that feeling that I was so desperately wanted with my first birth, which was just that, oxytocin overload of love, and just, this is, my baby. And we're sitting there for 10 minutes, And then we forgot to look at what the sex was. We were so just overtaken in the moment. And we were just so shocked it was a girl. We really thought it was another boy. So it was such a nice surprise. And she was born on the super full moon. So we had the full moon coming through the window, the light from the full moon coming through the window. And it's just candlelight, and it's just warm and lovely and amazing. And so I was really ready to get out of the water at that point. Been in the water for about 10 hours. And I climb into bed, and right when I sat on the bed to push myself back, my placenta just flew out, just shot out. And we put it in a bowl and laid down, and she started to breastfeed right away. And by the way, my son Indy slept through the entire thing. And I was howling and roaring and screaming, and he slept through the entire thing. And even when we're laying in bed next to him, and she's making her little crying, cooing newborn sounds, he's still sleeping through it. So it was just perfect. I'm laying there with my two littles, and it was just so lovely. And yeah, so I noticed, though, after I birthed the placenta, that my bleeding was a bit heavy. And I kind of was, very cautious of taking notice of, like, okay, still having quite a bit of bleeding, the placenta's been birthed, and, trying to feel like how comfortable I am. And after about an hour or two, I started to get a bit lightheaded and faint. And I was like, okay, I think like we need to go to the hospital. I'm not really sure what's going on, but I just want to go get checked out. I was starting to have kind of contractions. And like, this isn't normal. It's not just birth pain. So I was like, I think there's a sun placenta still inside me. So we called it to keep Zuzu, the little baby. We kept her attached to the placenta the whole time as we went to the hospital. So we were never separated, and she wasn't separated from her placenta at any point. And we get to the hospital, and I got to be honest, it was not a great experience. It was, we arrived, and it was this older male OB, and you could tell he was just very unhappy with the whole situation. That's fine. That's his prerogative. That's fine. That's his opinion and everything. But he kept asking me what I did wrong. What did I do to get myself he thought I had an infection. And I'm trying to tell him, I'm like, I truly believe that there's just some retained placenta. And they started putting me on drips and drugs without my consent at first. And I thought that was very strange, and it made me very uncomfortable. And they put me on Syntocin. And I'm like, well, I know that they give you a shot of Syntocin to try to stop hemorrhaging and bleeding, but my uterus was trying very hard to expel something. Like, I don't believe I needed Syntocin. I wasn't bleeding out to death, but my uterus was trying to get rid of something, and they were not listening to what we thought what was happening. So finally, after a couple hours, and I'm in immense pain. I'm still having crazy, horrible contractions. Now I have the Syntocin contractions happening. It's all very painful. They take me down to have an ultrasound, and guess what? Yes, there's something in there still. So either they can, I can be taken to surgery and have it removed surgically. No, that was a consensus. Sorry. Yeah. So that was the consensus. So we go back to our room, and I'm feeling upset, but not like overly. I just kind of wanted to get it all resolved and done with and go home. And so this male doctor, he came in and he misread the results of the ultrasound, and he proceeded to manually with his fingers reach into my uterus and remove what was in there, which the ultrasound showed that what was in there was too big to be removed like manually. Of course, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, like I don't know exactly what's what, and he convinced me that he could do it with his fingers and I wouldn't have to have surgery. So I said, okay, I've just given birth to a 4-kilo baby. Like, I'm not too excited about having someone put their fingers up into my uterus. So he does it, and he was violent. He was aggressive, and he was digitally like what I felt like was rape. It felt like he wanted to cause me pain, and I know that that's probably not true, but it felt there was anger intent behind it. I feel like he was not happy that a woman gave birth to a baby without him there or something.
And you didn't have pain medication, did you?
I didn't have any pain medication. So I have 2 midwives forcibly pushing down my uterus as he's sticking his fingers up into my uterus, trying to extract this blood clot piece of uterus, whatever it was, or piece of placenta or whatever it was. And so I was almost off the table through the roof screaming. He's telling me to be quiet, not to scream. He's he's like, just stay still. I'm like, I literally cannot stay still. And the midwives look at me and they're like, tell him to stop. And I'm like, okay, like, stop. And so he stopped, and my husband's in the corner just traumatized. Like, he didn't know. I can laugh about it now only because I have healed. Like, I don't feel like trauma from it anymore. But my poor husband is just traumatized in the corner, and he didn't know what to do throughout the whole thing. He's holding our newborn, like, what is happening? And then after that happened, my husband's like, you need to leave. We don't ever want to see you again. Do not touch my wife again. And so he left, and he made a big stink about it, and the whole hospital made a big stink about it. Like, we should just take whoever's there. And I'm like, well, I'm not consenting to be assaulted. So I would like a different doctor, please.
Which is your right to do. And so many women do this in the public hospital as well. And they should be treating with respect and kindness anyways. But I don't know much about placenta removal or anything, and I would like to have someone on to talk about it. But in the latest episode that I recorded, the lady who had some retained placenta or had it left inside, she did have a spinal, I'm pretty sure. So she did have heavy medication to help. So I can only imagine the intense pain you must have been in. To have someone's hand up inside you and inside there, it almost seems inhumane.
I know it is. I truly believe he wanted me to, like, I don't know. Yeah. It felt so much anger and aggression out of this man. Like, it was so unnecessary. And the midwives came in saying, oops, actually he misread the ultrasound, and the only way to remove the retained placenta was through a D&C, which is just a quick, surgical thing where they sweep out the uterus. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, why didn't someone stop him? Like, why why, like, why did we just have to go through this horrid, experience? So they take me down to surgery. Anyway, that goes fine. Well, it was a little piece of placenta. From what I know, retained placenta is very rare. It's, happens like 1 to 3% of the time. If you can be slightly at a higher risk, I mean very slightly, like a percentage higher risk if you've had a C-section before. But it's very rare to happen. So
was it actually embedded in your scar at all?
No, it wasn't.
Near scar site? It was completely away from there?
It was, yeah.
Sure.
So I don't know what would have caused it. Was it the, like my placenta evacuated pretty much, like it came out so fast. So I don't know what happened, and I'll never know. And it's okay, it's behind me. And if we have any more children, I will choose to free birth again. And it is a risk that retained placenta will happen again, but it's not something that I'm scared of. It's not something that I feel like I should fear. It's a reality, sure, and I can deal with it if it were something to happen again. But
and that's what the hospital's there for. You listened to your intuition. You went there.
Exactly.
You sought help. You didn't know anything about the topic because that's what the experts are supposed to know.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, in this case, the person working wasn't doing a thorough job. Mistakes happen, which, I think we've all been a victim of mistakes. I know I certainly have.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But that's what they're there for. So there you go. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah. So I went, they wanted me to stay overnight, and I said, no, I want to go home right now. So we left, and we had to sign, so many forms saying you're doing everything against their advice. And we went home, and, I was a bit weak for a few days, but I felt good. I didn't feel bad. And also in the surgery, I didn't tear at all during birth. So, that was great. Great thing to kind of get some validation of, that I was birthing, I was following my intuition, and I birthed her the best way that I could birth her. And we had a great, breastfeeding relationship right off the bat, and we still are. And yeah.
Awesome. And how old is your little baby now?
She's 16 months. So
awesome. Yeah. Well done.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
and now you've got the 2 little munchkins.
Yep. Yeah.
Are you planning another one?
Possibly. Sometimes I feel called, like maybe there's a little spirit baby out there that wants to join our family. And we feel like our babies come to us when they're ready. So we'll see. I'm open to it. So
you've had to work around a bit of trauma from your first birth and also from the second part. And before we jumped on the call, you mentioned that you do a bit of support birth trauma counselling.
I do, yeah.
And support. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so, being, faced with very hard life situations, I've just been, taught that healing and letting go of trauma and pain is just so important, because we will carry it. It will carry in our bodies, physically, in our, our minds, and spiritually. Like, we will carry that, and it's just so important to talk to someone about it. So I do a birth trauma debrief, which is basically, we can talk on the phone, virtually, or in person if you're in country Victoria, and we can go through, step-by-step things that have happened. You can have a chance to be really heard and acknowledged. Sometimes I feel like we really need that validation from somebody, that our trauma really matters. Our birth, the birth of our children really matters. And how we feel about it really matters. So, so I do, birth trauma debrief, and I do some coaching, just general women's coaching around health, relationships, and birth and pregnancy, if anyone's interested in free birthing and having a home birth.
Awesome. So what's your website they can catch you on?
I do some art to help. So my website is www.rootsofAwoman.com. So it's woman spelled WOMBAN, as in womb, so rootsofAwoman.com. And you can book sessions with me on there, or buy some art through there too, if anyone likes that. And I guess I should say too, like a huge healing part with my second was actually I had a very powerful ritual kind of ceremony with her placenta, and I actually only did this a few weeks ago, and she actually helped me. It was so wonderful. She just intuitively knew what I was doing with her placenta, and I got it out of our little container because we've had it in the freezer for the last year and a half, and we go out in the backyard and I dig a hole and we just start covering it in dirt and kind of massaging the dirt into the placenta, and I wrap it up in some paper, and we just made a massive bonfire, and I just said some words that were special to me, of releasing some trauma and releasing anything negative tied to that experience and with this placenta, but also thanking the placenta for the life that it nurtured in my belly, and release the placenta to the fire. And it was just incredibly powerful. And I think that we can't take it for granted how powerful it is to create little ceremony or create moments that with things that are so life-changing, because it can just really be healing and wonderful.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your stories, and for being so raw and vulnerable with us. Really appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and
thank you.
Love it. Thank you so much.
Hey, me again. I just wanted to let you know that I've just created a brand new Facebook group called VBAC Home Birth Support Group, where you can connect with other like-minded mothers who are looking to have a VBAC home birth as well. You can find the link in the show notes, and I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much for listening to the VBAC Home Birth Stories podcast. I hope that this episode has helped you take another step to finding your voice and confidence in your VBAC journey. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a second to rate and review. Each review helps us to help more women to find out more about VBAC home birth, just like you. Don't forget to take a screenshot, share it to your Instagram stories, and tag me at the Motherhood Circle. See you next week.